In 1975, because of our first entry of significant numbers of military units into the Republic of South Vietnam, I went from being an ardent anti-war activist and demonstrator in Seattle to being a volunteer, and I volunteered for the United States Army, even though I had been a very, very ardent anti-war advocate. But I knew that if my country went to war, it was my job to go to war. Simply because I knew I was a genius, I knew I had amazing skills with weapons, and I had studied an amazing amount of military history from the great battles of all over the world, from earliest historical sources to the present. I knew that I could save American lives if I were in a position of command in a war. And so I volunteered for the draft in 1975, and they swore me in Seattle, and I took an oath to protect, serve, etc., the Constitution of the United States. And unlike many of the poseurs who pretend to believe in the Constitution, but pretend for cash on radio and television programs, pretend to be protectors of the Constitution, I took that oath seriously then, and I do to this very moment. And so, when I volunteered for the United States Army, they accepted. I was sworn in Seattle, and I flew to Fort Ord in Northern California for basic training. And there, in basic training in Fort Ord, I became an American soldier. And at the end of my training, in basic training at Fort Ord, unlike all of the others in my training company, I was given no advanced training. I was given an assignment to report after taking a vacation at home. I was to fly from Seattle to Fort Richardson in Anchorage, Alaska, with no assignment except for overseas transportation. And that was it. And I thought that as an incredibly bright person, they should train me for war. And there I was, checking in at Fort Richardson. And when I did check in, I noticed that the person who was checking me in went to another person, and a phone call was made, and there was an Army captain on the phone at my end at Fort Richardson who was talking to someone elsewhere and constantly saying, "Sir, yes, sir, yes, sir, etc., sir." And I knew from the protocol that I observed in basic training that that meant there was somebody at least a couple of grades higher than that captain. So I thought, well, maybe I'm going to work for a very senior officer here, because they figured out how clever I am. So I said, okay. And what happened was I was given another airline ticket to go to Fairbanks, Alaska. And I reported in to headquarters company in Fairbanks, Alaska in the latter part of 1965. And there was no assignment. I was just assigned to headquarters in the transient bay. And I waited there for 14 days, doing nothing. And then a man came in the door of the transient bay, and he looked at my disheveled state and said, "Are you David Sanis?" And I said, "Yes, sir," immediately. Even though he was just simply dressed in exterior Parker clothes, in moon boots, I just said, "Yes, sir." And he said, "Come with me." I was then taken to a place where I was confronted with a lone building, one story, with no windows and one door in the middle of nowhere in the snow. Surrounded by a fence, it said, and I recall that fence very early, 1947 Walter S. McCarran Act. No admittance. Use of deadly force authorized. No admittance, no trespassing, etc. Again and again repeated around the perimeter of this fence, which is around a lone building without windows but in one door. And this man, Sergeant Ware, Army Sergeant that he was, led me near to the only door, told me to stand back, and he then dialed his way into the building through this huge steel bank vault door. And I went in, we went into a hallway. There were two more doors, both bank vault doors. The second one, he told me to stand back, dialed his way into the second bank vault door, into an anteroom that had a low privacy screen if you're sitting at a table there or sitting at a desk there. But over it, you could see another bank vault door, and he told me to wait in there, not move, as he went through this folding gate and opened a third bank vault door. And a man came back with him through that door seconds later. His name was Mr. Norris, Chief Warrant Officer for Norris, Army. He came back and said, "Sergeant Ware, take that man back to the barracks and get him into proper uniform. Get him shaved and get him a haircut. And bring him back." And I went from thinking that I was being called in for questioning because as a student at the University of Washington, I'd gone to every kind of bizarre meeting you could. I'd been to anti-vivisectionist league meetings. I'd become a member of the International Flat Earth Research Society out of Dover, England. I had taken courses to become a miracle working minister from A. Allen's Miracle Valley Bible Institute in Miracle Valley, Arizona, and had graduated in health, healing, and holiness as an ordained Pentecostal minister, empowered in the words of Matthew chapter 10, verse 8, to heal the sick, to cleanse the leper, to raise the dead, and to cast out demons. Freely receive, freely give. And I had gone to every kind of political meeting, from the American Communist Party to various socialist meetings, to various evangelical insane meetings of the radical right, and had publicly discomfited some of the great preachers from the John Birch Society, for example, and in the great right-wing organizations then thriving in the United States, just as we were getting into problems in Southeast Asia again. And those were the Christian Crusade, the Christian Anti-Communist Crusade, And there I was challenged at a Christian Crusade meeting, and for example, by the founder of that group, in a crowd of about 1,500 people at the Eagles Auditorium in Seattle, and was asked if I wanted to contribute in a mocking way, since I had mockingly interrupted the founder of the organization. And I answered that I wanted them to contribute money to another cause that was not to their liking. And I had many hundreds of people start en masse toward me to do me serious or deadly bodily harm. I was a troublemaker. What can I say? I had to pull a practice grenade, Army issue, but a dummy grenade. I had to pull the pin, throw it down, scream, "Die, motherfuckers!" And as the crowd all fled, not so intent upon doing me bodily harm anymore as fleeing for their very lives, I was able to walk out of the Eagles Auditorium and run down towards a huge hole that was for excavation for the I-5 freeway. I had similar incidents. I didn't have a sniper take a shot at me until I was in the third year at the University of Washington, and I happened to glance out my dormitory window on the third floor of Terry Hall just as a car on Campus Parkway slowed to a stop. I saw movement in the back seat, dropped to the floor just ahead of a bullet that pierced my window. And I've just been a troublemaker. That's all I can tell you. I've had a lot of fun. I've had a wonderfully fun life, studying enormously subjects that I thought would be useful to the Earth's inhabitants, and having a lot of fun as a rabble-rouser troublemaker. Just another troublemaker. That's all I can say. I want to live long enough to be able to bring this into fruition, and then I can die. I'll be happy with that. I'll be happy if I die today. But I want to get out at least some information about who I really am, because people would rather believe insanities peddled by people without knowledge of things without parallel, and believe that, than they would facts from a man sitting here in the Griffith Park below my favorite place, Griffith Observatory. If I could walk better, I'd be there tomorrow. But I'm here today because I have limited mobility. Now, why do I have limited mobility? That's the third area I want to talk about.